Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel and Escape from the City on the ABC. And Ben Kingsley, Chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of the 2018 Property Investment Advisory Firm of the Year.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch, where each week Ben and I bring you the insider's guide to property finance and money management. Welcome back to the couch, Ben.
Well, it's amazing how I turn up every week.
It is amazing. For 231 times, Ben.
231 times I've been here, and a couple of bone episodes as well.
Yeah, you've been.
So maybe if we added the bone episodes and all of this little special announcements that we've done, have we got the quarter of a
250?
Good 250? 250?
I reckon we might be at 250. All of us might be able to help us with that. Hey, I haven't said this for a long time. I'm going to say at the top of the show, Ben, because we are at episode 231. For those people who are new to the community. I deserve that because I do that to you all the time. For those people who are new to the community,
yes,
they might only be 20 deep, Ben. They might be 211 to 231.
Yep.
So I used to say this a lot, and I haven't of late. But what I'm going to say to you is, if that's you, start at episode number 1.
Yep.
And the first 20 episodes are foundational. And you need to know those first 20 episodes to catch the drift of a lot of the vernacular that we use, Ben.
Yep.
So what I'm going to say to those folks, if I'm talking to you, for our friends who've been with us at least one lap, some people have done 2 laps, Ben, this is all old news to them, but for the new people, start at episode 1. And I've also got a little life hack early for that, Ben.
Oh, I like to hear the life hack. What do you got for me?
If you're time poor and you want to get up to speed on the first 20 episodes quickly, you can actually download the binge guide.
Yes, that's a good point, Bryce.
So if you go to the website, Ivers, help me out, where will I go /TPC20? You can go there, Ben. You can go there straight now. Ivers will actually make it super simple for you. It'll be in the show notes. Click on that. Let us know where to send it to you, and we will send you the binge guide, and you can get up to speed very, very quickly. But whatever you do, you need to know those first 20.
Mate, and just if it were self-indulging at the moment, I do read the reviews every time I get a chance.
They're unbelievable.
And we've got one on the 27th of April, so we've got a few reviews. We've got 1,253 reviews all up. This one is from Scott Thorncraft. You got me back. Here we go.
Thank you.
Addictive.
Yep.
I got put onto the Property Couch from a colleague who thought it was worth a listen. I had to drive from the Gold Coast to Darwin that afternoon. Right, then what do you do? Then the next couple of days, because that's a fair trip, then the next couple of days I ended up playing it back to back for the next 37 hours.
Oh, apologies.
It's that good.
Oh, even with all my
Do yourself a favour in the Molly Meldrums. Do yourself a favour, download and listen. You'll be addicted. But you won't regret it.
Ooh.
So there you go.
No heckles about AFL there either.
No, that's good.
Nobody likes our AFL.
No worries, Scott.
Man.
Thank you very much for that great bit of feedback. We always like feedback.
I do apologise to those people who hate our footy talk. Get it.
We'll get it through quickly because I don't want to talk footy at the moment.
If you don't like footy, I get it, Ben. We just ramble on too much, so I get it. But a couple of things. Footy Tips winner for this most recent round, Ben, was just L. Capital L.
Capital L, that's it.
With 9.
It's not like that's losses. It's not wins. It should be W. It should be win.
It's winner. Capital L. So capital L, you know who you are. Reach out to Ivers or Emma.
Beautiful.
You got 9. And Ben, I don't normally do this, but Roger Ramjet.
It
was just a tip of the hat to someone who must be my generation.
He's our man.
That's our generation, right?
Our nation. Something like that it goes, isn't it?
Please don't stop.
No,
please do not
Showing
stop.
our age. That's
so someone who is a tip of the hat to, they must be a 70s child or an early 80s child to know Roger Ramjet.
True.
So they came second with 8, but a margin of 2. Ben.
Booked for both of them. Terrific. Well done. Congratulations, L.
And anyone who's interested, Ben, you are in fact Gandhi.
Yes, I am Gandhi. Gandhi. Yep.
And I am Fife.
Fife.
As in Nat Fife.
Yep.
And I just wanted
let's move on.
I just wanted to say.
What's next, Bryce?
If people were to rewind at least 3
episodes. And now
episodes,
your mindset minute.
If people were to rewind at least 3 episodes, you and Ivers were pack hunters.
Oh, No, not so
Did
much
you hear
Ibis.
Ibis?
She was just
Ibis
gloating in the
She was
glory
gloating
of
how
being-
good she was
yeah.
at tipping. So I am no longer on the bottom.
No, I am. Let's move on. So your mindset
So
minute this
you
week,
are
Bryce.
on the bottom. Now let's just pause for effect. You're on the bottom. Hey, folks, we did a webinar last night, Ben. It was about the Evergreen Principles.
Yes.
It was effectively a webinar about the first 20 episodes of this podcast.
Correct.
So if
With a little bit more deep diving.
Yeah, we did some really cool stuff. So if anyone's interested in having a sneaky look at that, we've got an encore tomorrow.
Oh, great.
So Ibis will put a link in the show notes. If you want to turn up to the encore, it's on Friday, 2 o'clock Australian Eastern Daylight Time. You can check that out. And you've got a webinar tonight.
Tonight, Bryce, yes. So Picker, but you have to be a member of Picker to attend. So the special link, pay your $5, and we're doing a deep dive on, well, a couple of great things happening, right? First of all, I've got Tim Lawless from CoreLogic RP Data. So he's doing the market update, effectively the latest data in the market. So I'm really looking forward to that. Because he does some tremendous insights. One of Australia's thought leaders in the property space. So the $5 just for him is worth it. And then we're going to do a bit more of a deep dive into Labor's policy on negative gearing. So it is all negative gearing at the moment.
What about old mate from across the border in Adelaide?
Well, Pete's going to be there as well, so he'll be on the panel at the end to answer any questions as well. So we have a star-studded lineup for that.
The heavyweights.
Yeah, the heavyweights are there, and I think we've got over 200 people who have registered.
Ooh.
So we can only take 500. So please,
That'll go really quick.
And I know it's tonight. I know it's just in the afternoon now. So, but if you've got a bit of free time tonight,
Check it
register. And if you can't make it, we'll also play the replay.
Now, Ben, I recently did a little skit.
7 p.m. Sorry, good start time on that. I was just been given Ivis a little 7 p.m. 7 p.m. tonight. So you got time.
If people listen really, really, really well, they'll see sometimes, Ivis whispering in the background, giving us a nudge. I did an REA video, our good friends at realestate.com.
Yes.
Did one with Paul Roos. It was a lot of fun. A bit of fun about sports planing. So there'll be a link if you guys want to check that out. We'll put it through our socials. Hey, Ben, we also had a book, the Money Blocks that we had with Denise Duffield-Thomas.
Yes.
We have a winner.
Great. And the winner is?
The winner is Brooke Lynn.
Brooke Lynn.
Yeah.
Congratulations,
I wonder
Brooke.
if she's from America, but she said several money blocks identified, that money doesn't grow on trees, that you have to work hard for money, easy come, easy go, and the people who have money are greedy. These beliefs have left me working hard, 2 jobs sometimes at a time, even whilst writing my thesis, getting a good job with the help of the mighty Hextet. So that was good feedback. There was a little bit more to that as well. So if you want to go and have a look on Facebook and see what Brooke Lynn wrote. But Brooke, reach out to us. We're going to give you a copy of the book that Denise Duffield-Thomas gave us. Was Get Rich Lucky Beep. Ivis did the work for you. So therefore you can come and get that. And of those people who also were involved, we sent out some books as well.
Brilliant.
Last thing on the housekeeping, Ben.
Okay.
I know it's a big housekeeping agenda.
We've got a big show today.
Negative gearing video. So we're going to be talking about negative gearing today. They're the
Correct.
questions that the people have asked us on Facebook. But
Yep.
you've done a negative gearing video series.
Just
right?
a little series.
Now, Ivis has reminded me that it's on the Property Couch Facebook page. So the first one is up, Ben. The first one up, you talk about what is negative gearing.
Oh,
Some people might
okay.
not even know what it is.
Very good.
Second, what tax do you need to pay as a property investor? So there's a few things. So if you want to go and check that out, you can go and have a look. And there's an opportunity there for you to notify us if you want to be informed of the whole video series, Ben.
Great.
So go and check that out.
Thank you.
All right, my mindset minute today is very simple. Don Jose Ruiz. I've read a book, Ben, called The 4 Agreements. It changed my life. If anyone wants to read a book that has a huge impact, The 4 Agreements, number 1 is be impeccable with your word. Number 2, don't take anything personally, Ben, including compliments as well as criticism. Number 3, don't make assumptions. Number 4, always do your best. Sounds really simple, but when you unpack it, it's really, really powerful.
Very powerful stuff.
Now, Don Miguel said this recently. Your shadow is often in effect when you notice a trait in someone else that really bothers you, such as arrogance or rudeness, etc. What you may not realise is that what you easily notice that trait in another is because you have the same characteristic in yourself and dislike it in yourself, Ben.
Okay.
This is what is meant by the phrase, other people are my mirror. So Ben,
Interesting.
so Success Leaves Clues, this man's very successful, has written a wonderfully powerful book. So here's the invitation to our community. If you find something that someone does around you irritating, chances are it's something
Look
that
in the
you're
mirror.
not quite happy about
Okay.
yourself. So thank you.
Thank you.
Don Miguel Ruiz for that. Hey, Q&A day, negative gearing.
Yes.
Q&A. We sent out the call. What are the questions you want asked or answered by us? And we got some in
We've got some
droves.
great questions.
Now, Ben, you guys through Picar have put out some details and also some questions. And I wanted to really do that as to set up today's podcast.
Correct.
So you've said Labor's policy on negative gearing is lacking a lot of detail. And we've talked about that quite a bit over the last 2-3 months. Even though they've had this policy position since before the 2016 election.
Yep.
Picar is calling on Labor to provide a lot more detail to help voters in the upcoming election to have a more thorough picture of their policy to help make an informed decision on who they vote for. So currently, here it is, folks. The Labor has told us this with regards to negative gearing. Number one, only new properties will be able to be negatively geared. Number two, all investments made before the 1st of January 2020 will not be affected by the changes to negative gearing and will be fully grandfathered. Number three, losses from investments will continue to be able to be offset against investment gains in the same financial year, regardless of asset class. And number four, within year losses can still be carried forward and offset against future capital gains on the investment. Ben.
So we're going to get a few questions about that. So you're probably thinking, can you explain that to me a little bit more? Well, we're going to do that as we work through some of these questions because that's brief information and as usual, the devil's in the detail. So that's why we've lent out to Labor, and the same thing for capital gains tax. Bryce, just go through those as well.
Yeah, so currently Labor has told us capital gains tax will be halved, a 50% tax increase for assets purchased after 1st of January 2020, reducing CGT for assets purchased after 1 Jan 2020 from 50% to 25%. Two, all investments made before the 1st of January 2020 will not be affected by the changes to CGT and will be fully grandfathered. Three, the existing CGT discount that applies to superannuation funds will not be affected. And four, the 50% active asset reduction concession that applies to small business will not be affected, Ben. Now you've asked some clarifying questions, and we might finish the podcast with those just to make sure.
Depends on how much time we've got. We've got a lot to get through.
Covered them, but we have got some questions. So anyone who's got us sent out a question on Facebook and we answer Ben, let us know. We're going to send you a copy of Make Money Simple again. But the first one here, Ben, is from Scott Kirby. If negative gearing is scrapped and grandfathered, what will be the effect on a property you withdraw equity from after the rule is put in place? Will the increased debt on the property keep it negatively geared when you have done the release after the potential rule is put in place?
Okay, so this one's a pretty easy one, Scott. And again, this is always subject to Labor clarification, but in reality, where you draw your equity from, where you draw your borrowings from against any property, it's the purpose of the funds, right? So in other words, it's really simple to understand that it doesn't matter if it was property B that I drew their equity from and I'm using that money to buy property A. The purpose of the fund says it's property A, which means that in the current laws, any interest deductions is tax deductible against that property. So don't worry about withdrawing equity. That's probably the simple way of putting it.
Yeah, because the purpose of the loan is really important. Because if you were to harvest some equity and put it into a renovation bin under the current depreciation rules, because you paid for the depreciation, you could claim the depreciation and also the interest on that, subject to checking to your accountant, versus if you were to harvest the equity and buy a new investment property, the purpose of the loan, well, still investment purposes, but they've been very clear that if it's after the 1st of January, it doesn't apply. So good one, Scott. Hopefully that's helped. Pat Gardner, who's a very good friend of the Property Couch, Ben, is very, very active on our socials. My question is pretty much along the lines of Scott Kirby's. If you currently have a principal place of residence, will you be able to draw equity and use as a negatively geared investment after 2020 or whatever they propose the change happens? I think that's...
Yeah, I think we've answered that in terms of... in terms of the principal place of residence, and this is where a couple of other questions are coming up, if before the 1st of January, you bought the property before that time. So if we go by the letter of the law in terms of all investments made before, so if you turn your property from a principal place of residence into an investment property and you've got debt against that, and it's negatively geared, my understanding is you will be able to claim it. So, and this is where again, one little caveat, that's where the devil's in the detail.
Yeah.
But if I read as per, what you read out before, Bryce, was straight off Labor's website. My understanding, all investments made before the 1st of January. Now, if they're going to argue that wasn't an investment that you made, but that's a purchase by that date as per the contract of sale. So this is what frustrates me about Labor. Imagine if they did come out and say, no, if you turn an existing principal place into an investment property, sorry, not for you. That will annoy a lot of people because there are a lot of people, Bryce, who become quasi-property investors because they keep their existing property and they upgrade. So we're hoping that Labor will not affect these people, but that's one of the questions.
Because it's one of the questions you've written to them for asking.
Correct.
As you say, as you interpret that, it seems pretty clear.
Yep.
However,
when it says investments made, well, that's not an investment. Well, it is an investment.
Yeah.
Everything I buy is an investment, whether it's a principal place of residence or whether it's an investment. So I think that's where we want some absolute clarity before the election so we can get that message out there. But again, I don't think Labor are going to want to enter into any discussions prior to the election.
Very good, thank you, Pat. Great question. Nicholas Conroy, if you currently have a principal place of residence which you plan to change to investment in the future, which is what you've just been talking about, is the grandfathering based on when the property is purchased or when it is switched to investment? If you look at that,
correct.
And it's based on the contract date, not the settlement date. It's
correct. The date that you bought that property. So, and if it's a principal place of residence versus investment, we're going to say to Labor, you told us that it was when they bought the asset. When they bought the asset. So you're going back on your word if you do change that.
The only relevant recent behaviour you can think about is the depreciation change on the 9th of May. So anything that you'd done prior to 7:30 as a contract qualified, anything after. So that's what you'd think was, a precedent. But as you say, Ben, that's not clear. Hey, Michelle Bond, a book coming your way. Looks like my question is along the similar lines to above, so no doubt this will be covered. We just purchased a principal place of residence, but may look to turn it to investment in the future. Queries around the timelines for both living in now, then renting out, then selling, and what impact new government legislation may have.
So I think we've done a good job of answering that. And the 6-year
I just want to give
rule,
our books, Ben.
Oh no, I like that. That's why, it's always good to hear people's names on the podcast. So from my point of view, in terms of the 6-year rule, there's been no discussion about any changes to the 6-year rule.
Yep. Hey, Jake Lehman says, similar to Scott, is it the property or the loan that is grandfathered? Property, I assume, and what, if any, other consideration when refinancing, assuming the new changes come in?
It's all about the property. Don't worry about where the debt comes from. Labor has told us nothing in terms of refinancing debt. So the reality is the nexus of the loan should continue if it's a dollar for dollar refinance or thereabouts. So I would suspect, again, we were being sold a pup if they do change it, but it's all about the property.
See if we can give away 20 books, Ben. That's our goal today. So Jake, one for you. Here's one from Amy Williams. If negative gearing is scrapped on established properties and only allowed on new constructions, but the construction industry is already slowing to a halt and capital growth often in the red, how viable is property investment as a means of securing your retirement in the next 30 years? Great question, Amy.
Well, Amy, we've talked about the data before. 66% of all properties in Melbourne, 2 out of 3 failed between 2011 until the current date. So 0 negative equity. Brisbane, 1 in 2 failed since 2011. In Sydney, 1 in 4, 23% have failed in regards to any capital growth or negative equity, and worsening at the moment. So this is our argument about how it will impact the property market, in the sense that if 30% of the buyers are investors and 10 or 15% of that say, well, I'm not buying new, they're buyers out of the market, and they'll redeploy their money into other investment classes, shares, whatever it is that they're doing, and so that will impact the property market, pure and simple.
And for people, it'll make the rich get richer too, Ben, because the people who can afford the actual established properties without having the cash flow bonus of negative gearing, they'll just continue to grow wealth because they'll be buying in a market that has a secondary market.
Correct. So I want to talk more about that, because that's the bit that's annoying me the most in terms of Labor's rhetoric.
Martin Machado, Martin, you've got a great surname there, maybe I can't pronounce it. So what is the experience with this type of tax scheme in other countries? Is there evidence of its impact on the real estate bubble?
Well, a bubble? I'm not sure I'd call it a bubble. If I look at, property price performances across Melbourne since 1974, it's a very long bubble. We won't see corrections of 20, 30 or 40% like we see in the stock market. That's what I'd class as a bubble. If Labor does get their policy in, the research is telling us a further 15% fall, SQM research on property prices. Now that will take markets like Sydney and like Perth into bubble territory, because you'd be about 25, almost 30% corrections across the market. So I'd argue that, but I would also say that's not a bubble that's been created by the buyer. That's a bubble that's been created by and manufactured by the regulators, so the APRA, also a consequence of the Royal Commission and conservative lending, and then to absolutely really pop the market, Labor's policy will do that. And if we get to that territory, recession everywhere, job losses, unemployment high, it will be catastrophic for this economy.
And we're reasonably unique in terms of the world landscape too, Ben. For example, the US don't have negative gearing, but the challenge is it forms the fabric of our property system currently. So to do a big shock like that and change, that's the challenge.
Well, and looking at other markets and what's happened over there in terms of housing affordability, the fact of the matter is this: some markets in the world do have, like in America, Bryce, you're talking about, you can claim interest as a deduction on your principal place of residence. So why are we come back to New York, Boston, LA, San Francisco, all their big cities have bloody expensive property, right? The same as Shanghai, Beijing, Tokyo, Singapore, London, Paris. I mean, buying property on the Champs-Elysees, it's just a walk. It's like, I've just got to spare €350,000.
Yeah.
Wouldn't even get you a shoebox. Wouldn't even get you a car park along that strip. So
doesn't get you a ticket to the Eiffel Tower.
So my point being, it's irrelevant. I mean, we've had this in our tax system since 1934, in terms of the ability to be able to claim a deduction against the expenses of running a business. Now, this just happens to be a hobby business. So from my point of view, looking at what's happened in other cities around improving affordability or bringing a level playing field, that's not the case. The best way to get a level playing field is to incentivise supply, is to get, the investors, if there's 100 apartments being built and investors buy 30 of them, there's 70 that goes to owner-occupiers, right? So it does not make sense that you would sit there and say this is going to bring on supply when it's not.
Karen Simpson asks, why are there policy attacks on limited recourse borrowing arrangements for property, apparently based on the evils and risks of negative gearing? However, borrowing does not necessarily mean negative gearing, it just means gearing.
Well, it does. I mean, the reality in terms of, so what she's talking about here is in self-managed super funds.
Yep.
Okay, so she's talking about limited recourse borrowing arrangements. So when you're borrowing money to buy property in super, you can't have the lending inside named to the super fund. You've got to have it separate, and that obviously then protects the super fund. What Karen is talking about is Labor is planning to ban any type of lending in your super fund. So true to their consistent, industry fund backstory and their connections with the unions, there has been a lot of people moving to self-managed super funds. It can potentially be a great vehicle for certain people. We heard Julia Hartman talk about that in terms of she likes it as a vehicle for tax minimisation. So that all makes sense. But in terms of what you're talking about here, if Labor wins, they are going to ban the ability to borrow inside a self-managed super fund. And if you borrow, normally there's a cost associated with that. So the deductibility makes it negatively geared. So it's sad, but true. And it's another argument where it's going to slow down economic activity.
Ray Van Korsveld. Many economists predict an increase in rental prices if negative gearing is abolished, since only the initial part of the loan is negatively geared, as it is later positively geared and therefore taxable. Will this have as much of a negative impact on the property market as predicted? Or is it that the combination of the abolishment of negative gearing as well as the reduction in capital gains discount will cause the knock-on effect over time and make property less attractive?
I think that's the message there, Ray, in terms of the data that we're looking at, would suggest that it will take people out of investing in property. Bryce, what you were mentioning before, when Labor's rhetoric is around stopping people buying their fifth and sixth property, unfortunately it doesn't, right? I mean, the high income earners will still be able to cover that shortfall loss. And that's the frustrating bit. They'll continue to buy properties in well-located areas where the land appreciation is still going to be strong because, as we've always talked about here, you know, if you buy in areas with high owner-occupier appeal and gentrification, there will be capital growth. But what we're talking about here is that if existing arrangements are in place where 45% of people are already buying new properties under current negative gearing structures, those people will move out of the market. And when you move that demand out of the market, less demand obviously means lower prices, and also that less demand means that there'll be less supply coming on, which means a reduction in the amount of available rental properties. Now, Labor is countering that from the lessons that they learned from 85 to 87 by a build to rent strategy, but they're not going to be able to do that in standard freestanding houses, right? So there will be a massive shortage of 3 and 4 bedroom houses, and those rents will definitely go up. Whereas there might be still enough supply for people who want to live in a high-rise apartment, but that's not most of Australia.
Hey Ben, we had Ken Maynard write into us recently and took a snapshot, showed us a picture of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad's Guide to Investing. It was written in 2000.
Yep.
Did you see this?
Yeah, I read it. Yeah,
He highlighted the section, it was on page 139. He said, in Australia today, the government still has laws that allow investors to negative gear their investment real estate. And again, this was written back in 2000. In other words, you are encouraged to lose money on your rental real estate with the idea of gaining a tax break from the government. We in the United States had the same rules, tax rules, until 1986. When I speak in Australia about investing, I often hear howls of protest about my warnings that the government could change the laws just as they did in the United States. I hear things such as, the government won't change the rules, and I just shake my head. They just don't realise how painful the law change was to millions of investors in the United States. Several of my friends had to declare bankruptcy and lose everything they'd worked years or decades to acquire.
So, you know, that's the consequences in the US of what's happened. And now, you know, that's the irony, right? You can claim a deduction against so you don't pay stamp duty over there, you pay an annual property tax. But if you've got interest against that, you can also offset against that tax. So it's an interesting system over there.
Good question, Ray. Let us know. We'll send you that book. Simon, how do you say that, Ben? Simeon? Sorry, Simeon, I've butchered your name. Simeon Lawler. Are there any countries without negative gearing we can compare with to predict the direction of Australia's property market? So there we go, folks. I think we covered that. Just wanted to make sure we gave a book away.
Just a quick summary again. It's just understanding that lots of different countries have lots of different regulations and policies, and so what open markets don't like is radical changes to those, right? So, you know, this is where Labor talks about everything's grandfathered, so it won't affect you because you're going to be able to negative gear. I want the capital growth, Labor. I don't care so much about just getting a tax deduction in the earlier stages. Your ability to take buyers out of the market will affect the growth of a lot of properties in the marketplace. Now, for those people where owner-occupier appeal is super strong, I don't think it will affect it as much. But again, for those people who are bought in medium-high rise, they're stuffed, right? That is absolutely, you know, coming back to Kiyosaki's book around, they'll go bankrupt if they've got a lot of exposure in that area, because no one's going to buy that stuff, and that's going to cripple construction, and that's going to cripple jobs. So it just doesn't make sense to say what happened in these other countries. Now, because England, I should say, have recently looked at doing some similar types of things, but the reality is, and it's all about an affordability argument, but you cripple the economy to try and, so why would you make property values go lower to let more people in, to bring fairness into the market? We've been able to bring fairness in the market with APRA's interventions. We've taken the investors out. So it's not it doesn't get any better than fair now, right?
The policy was crafted to give first homeowners a go. Well, they've got to go now.
They've got to go.
Yeah, they've got an opportunity. They're not got to go. They've got an opportunity.
Correct.
So market forces are already doing what it was intended to do. Anastasia Slipper, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are at the more macroeconomic level around what effect you think this might have on the property market over the medium term. One thing that comes to mind is potentially an increase in larger blocks being subdivided, developed into multiple townhouses for tax purposes, and that's absolutely.
Anastasia, you
nailed it.
You've nailed it. We've said this.
That's the point about the rich getting richer. Who can afford to go closer in and buy a block that's able to be subdivided and developed into multiple for tax purposes? The wealthy can do that, not the average mum and dad.
Correct. Now, back in 2015, we started telling that story, before the election of 2016. So we were on it straight away.
Yep.
In terms of investors will find a way to invest in an asset class if they've got a lot of cash flow. Remember, this policy stops typical mum and dads from investing, not from those people who have good, strong incomes. And this is another way in which they can make higher wealth when average Australians are going to be locked out of investing in property. And that's my biggest frustration here, that the average person is going to be locked out because they do get that little bit of a helping hand early. They're not going to get it. The high income earners, they're going to come in and say, I'm going to buy that bit of dirt, I'm going to turn it into a block of townhouses or whatever. Now, this is one of the questions that we have asked Labor, have asked Labor in terms of what's going to happen here, because in theory, if you construct that property, so let's say you bought the existing property, knocked it over, but have built 4 new townhouses on that site. Is that negatively gearable? Like, you know, and this is where Labor, this is the big detail, right? Because if you want to completely kill construction, if you want to drive everyone out of the property market, you know, where property prices are going to go up because we're going to be so starved of supply, then do that.
Yeah, because it's a good question, isn't it? Because there's no transaction, there's no contract. The owner of the established property who doesn't qualify now has turned apples into apple pie.
Correct.
But what's the detail that says can they now?
That's the number one question I want Labor to answer. And if they do answer it right, well then the reality is going to be, which is what we said back in 2015. So I think it's the right thing to do to be able to make them negatively geared. Well, the right thing to do is not change the policy, period, right?
Well, not change it this way.
This way, that's right. And so my point being is if we don't get that ability to be able to negatively gear the new construction, why am I going to do it? I'm not even going to build your rent to build your build to rent stuff. I'm not going to do anything.
Just missed out on 4 extra supply.
Crazy stuff. So hopefully they'll get it done.
Also, Gillian Stewart, she is one of our summer series, Ben. So,
great. Yep.
She's got a regional portfolio, very good with money. And her question is actually one of the questions that you've got outstanding for the current Labor Party. Is negative gearing based on a whole portfolio or on individual properties? What if one is positive and one is negative? Do they cancel each other out in your tax return, or are they assessed individually? And will this continue to be the case if Labor get in? That's a question that in the detail we don't know.
Yeah, so what we have is point 3, which is losses from investments will continue to be able to be offset against investment gains in the same financial year, regardless of asset class. So we're sort of saying there, if you've got some shares and you've got a negatively geared property and the shares are giving you dividends, then you should be able to offset those losses. But what we're talking about here is we want further clarification on that. So if one person had an existing investment property that was positively geared
under the old rules,
and then they go and buy a negatively geared property, will they be able to offset that negatively geared? Now, based on what they're telling us, it sounds logical. It sounds like a yes. So coming back to Julian's question,
as long as it's in the same year.
As long as, well, again, if it's not even in the same year, it's the income loss versus the income gain for each year rolling forward, right? So that's a great question. And based on what they're telling us in their, 25 words or less, it sounds like, yes, that's going to be possible. So what does that mean? Again, for existing investors, another opportunity to create lots of wealth. For newbies who want to get started in property investing, sorry, not for you millennials.
Yeah. Shop shut.
Sorry, shop shut. Not only are we not going to give you any, so the millennials are getting shafted again. They talk about they had to pay for their education, property prices are more expensive. You're getting it in the back once more if Labor says this is what we're going to do. Because all of us who have got multiple properties has a positively geared portfolio. So we're just going to say, well, I'm going to be able to offset that. So I'll be able to build my portfolio from 2 to 3 or 4. So silly policy once again.
Timothy Styler, what would be your preferred solution to the problem? Negative gearing capped at 0% of income, to a percentage of income, fixed maximum deductions, or something else?
So there's been a lot of talk about whether you do a cap on the number of properties price. And you think, all up, you think, well, that's pretty sensible.
Makes sense.
But the challenge with that is that you could buy, if you've got $500,000 in Australia, you could go out and buy $80,000 units in areas like Sale or, fringes, regional areas around Australia. So all of a sudden you have your 5 properties. So it's a capped at 5 properties or whatever it may be. So the idea of a percentage of the loss being the cap is easier to work with and easier to administer and gives everyone a level playing field. But my point is this: negative gearing adds to supply, right? It does a very, very good job in heavy lifting of adding to supply. So I wouldn't change negative gearing, and later in the show, I'll tell you what I think we should do with capital gains tax.
Okay, all right, like it. This one's from Leo Noor. When will the next election be after the upcoming election, Ben? Already future planning. For us investors to know, how long do we have to purchase some properties?
Well, they're every 3 years. What we're talking about here is it was introduced back in 85 to 87, so it could be repealed because we've had precedents of that, right? So my point to you, Leo, is you've got until January 1. Now, even if Labor win the election, there is still a fight that's going to go on, right? We are not done here. Our job, our work is not done here in showing Labor the errors of their ways and that there is potentially a better solution moving forward. Because if the economy is sluggish because of Labor's changes to the macro economy and their tax grab everywhere, then I suspect business investment and so forth is going to be challenged. And if they see that, this is just going to be, again, you're going to cut the economy off at the hip, not necessarily at the foot. So I think don't worry about when the next election's coming. We're doing a lot of work to try and make sure that Labor, even if they do win the election, doesn't get the job done and changes their views on this policy.
And Ben, for voting 101 here, the Australian landscape has been divided up into 150 seats. So you'll be voting for the House of Representatives in the lower house,
yes,
wherever you live, to be one of those 150 represented. So that's where it looks clear that Labor Party have the numbers, which is why they'll be able to form a government. But what's also not always as well known is there's also the upper house, which is the Senate, which has 76 seats, Ben. So that's why you need to have half or more to be able to get your policies through unopposed. Now, under the current framework, which is subject to change, the Labor Party do not have the majority in the upper house, in the Senate. So then what happens is if you have people in a party that aren't part of the two majors, they're called crossbenchers, and if they want to get their bills through, they need to negotiate with the crossbenchers. So
the independents.
So what does that mean? So if Labor was to get in, they would then need to propose a bill. It would likely pass through the lower house because they would have a majority and would get through. As soon as it gets to the upper house, they would get the votes from the Labor senators, and then they probably wouldn't get the votes from the Liberal senators. And then what would be left is a negotiation play with those crossbenchers to say, we need your support, because if we can't get, what's half of 76, Ben, on the run is 38, is that
Correct.
right? So if they need 39 votes in the Senate to get it through, and if they don't have 39 votes in their own party, they will need to negotiate with the crossbenchers. Now the crossbenchers will need to make a decision on whether they think, based on the economy, whether that's a good, a bad, or they'll negotiate somewhere in between. So when you're going to the election on May the 18th, it's good to know what you're doing. You're voting for a representative in your area to be one of the 150, but you'll also vote for a senator. And that senator will also have a very powerful say in not only crafting negative gearing policy, but every bill that is put in whilst the next government is in place. And equally, whenever there's a change of government, the same thing applies. So it's important to understand what you're voting for on May the 18th and how powerful it means. You're not voting for, like I used to think when I was a kid, you're not voting for a person. I used to think, am I voting for John Howard or am I voting for John Houston? No, you're voting for a representative in your seat, which then has a majority. They elect someone, which is the Prime Minister, to represent us all.
Yeah, so you're voting for their policy ideas, and those policy ideas are vetted through the Senate. That's the best way to put it in my view. So a lot of people in the past have voted for the policy ideas, but if their party's not going to win, they then go and make sure that there's an independent in the Senate who's more aligned to their views of whether it be investment, climate change, taxation, or whatever. So if you want to vote Liberal, then you'll probably vote Liberal right through. But if you're one of those people who vote for the smaller parties, you'll pick up the how to vote form as you walk in the gate, and that'll give you the idea of how you need to vote.
And it's why a lot of the politicians are spending time in swinging seats, Ben, because it's no point that Scott Morrison's in a Labor seat, and there's no point that Bill Shorten's in a Liberal seat. They're spending a lot of time in swinging seats that just fluctuate
to get the
so
numbers.
They can try and get the numbers.
Good work.
Hey, Alex Wagner says, love the content, guys. In your opinion, does the removal of negative gearing make implementing the 4 pillars any more difficult And would you recommend purchasing my first property before or after January 1st when the grandfathering rules take place? Would love to hear your thoughts, as this is currently my big block to buying, Ben.
Okay, so we're on record as saying that it is a very good time to buy. Even in the property cycle, you're getting good value for money. If Labor gets their full policy in, you'll probably even get better value for money, as it will probably have significant downside risk to the property market. Again, I'm a believer that cooler heads will prevail, Bryce, even if Labor does get in, that they will change this policy. So with that mindset, I want to lock it in. I want to make sure that I'm going to get some type of assistance for a short period of time as I build out my portfolio. So I would be shopping before the 1st of January. In fact, for a lot of our clients, we've been saying, I'd be even shopping before Labor gets announced as the winner, right? Because as soon as you know they're the winner, their probability of their policy getting seeing the light of day is higher. So you're locking that. Now, there is beyond no doubt that you're going to get that negative gearing benefit if you buy before the 1st of January.
And Ben, I can tell you from on-the-ground experience from my buyer's agency team, it's an interesting time where people are waiting to make a decision for the election to happen before they make a decision. So we're using this time of inertia right now to our favour, because if it even drops 1 or 2 or 3, because the A-grade properties that we're chasing have always got competition, Ben.
Correct.
Irrespective of what's on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald, the Herald Sun, there's always competition on A-grade properties. So if we can drop a couple off when we're competing, we love that. So there's an opportunity. So,
and in terms of what we do after, that might come down to the types of vehicle that we use. So again, lacking in detail, what if I have a company and my company buys an investment property? That company can claim the tax because they've given no disclosures around companies not being able to claim their expenses. So there's different things that we need to know about. And so we're not going to make any announcements in terms of what vehicle you should be buying until such time as we see thorough detail in regards to Labor's policy.
Now, Alex, in terms of the core of your question, does it make implementing the 4 pillars any more difficult? The answer is, if the policy was to get up in its current form, it would make it more difficult for you to cash flow a portfolio. So you would actually have to space the portfolio out over a longer period of time, and you'd probably have to work longer to achieve a self-funded retirement. So it would absolutely change the cash flow management pillar, Ben.
But you're still going to pick the eyes out of it. So asset selection is still going to be right. Borrowing power is still going to be determined by your surplus cash flow.
And you're still going to put a defence in place.
Yeah, and you're still going to put, so it's not fundamentally going to shift. It's just going to, as you say, stretch it out.
And for those of you that are new to the podcast, the 4 pillars are very simple. A for asset selection, B is for borrowing power, C is for cash flow management, D is for defence. We think that you need to master all 4 of those to build a successful property portfolio. Go back to the first 20 episodes if that is foreign to you. Dale Gillespie has asked, it seems to be argued that negative gearing should not apply to the super wealthy who own 5, 6 or more properties. Should it be based on the dollar value on a property or portfolio rather than the number of houses owned? Now, you did cover that, Ben, but we still want to give Dale a book.
I think just quickly for Dale, that's exactly right. I mean, there's no fairness in this policy. This is supposedly going to raise a lot of revenue. That's why they went down that course, right? It's helped with their election pledges to buy office. So that's the reality, right? So a better constructed policy would look at a percentage of losses claimed, not the number of properties capped. But again, I don't think there should be any changes to negative gearing because it does an amazing job of adding to supply in the property space.
So Liam, here's one from you. Unfortunately, it seems inevitable that it will happen. Is there any positives that we can take from it? Does it change any fundamental principles when it comes to property investment? No, I in fact think it reinforces the fundamental principles that location will do 80% of the heavy lifting. The closer in you can get, particularly if you can go into a market that is popular to both owner-occupiers as well as investors. And if you are able to then get the better land and turn it into a brand new property closer in to take advantage of that market where there will still be a secondary market, if you were to sell it as an investor, it makes it more important than ever.
Keep it real simple. On the good stock, the A-grade stuff you were talking about before, Bryce, there's usually up to 10 buyers. If there's 10 buyers, 7 of them are owner-occupier, 3 of them are investor. Right, so you knock out 2 of those investors, and so you've still got competition, right? So you've still got demand. But Liam, I'm forever an optimist, right? So let's say hypothetically, Labor gets in, and then we have a situation where Labor tries to implement their policy but gets blocked in the Senate, or they actually come to their senses and realise that with the data that we provided them, that this isn't going to give them the impetus and the growth in the economy. In fact, it's actually going to reduce the amount of revenue that they receive. Once they work that out, I think you'll see that they may be looking to change that policy. So in its current form, I'm going out on a limb and saying it would be economic suicide for Labor to introduce this policy in its current form.
All right, Ben. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 books, Ben. We're going for 20. Tom Lyons, one thing which has not been made clear in all the discussion is what happens to the investment losses if you were to buy an established property after negative gearing was removed. Are the taxable losses you incur simply lost, or do you hold on to the losses and they can be offset? They can be used to offset future investment income once the property moves into a positively geared position down the track. I know this is the case for some countries which do not allow negative gearing, and then just makes it a timing issue as you access those benefits in the longer term.
So referring back to the statements on the Labor's website, within year losses can still be carried forward and offset against future capital gains on the investment. So this is the challenging bit. So let's say you buy one investment property and it's negatively geared to start with, but you can't claim that. So there is a loss that you're carrying forward, right? Now, you can see up in the point 3 that they make on there, if you've got other investment income, you can offset it against that. But if that's the only investment income you've got, then it will accumulate as a carried forward loss, and it would be able to be deducted from the capital gain that you had in the property if you were to sell it. Now, I've always said, if the taxman's going to tax me at 75% of my gain, I would be dumb in selling that property if it's a good performing asset, right? At 50%, there might be an argument that you sell it. So this is where, again, I think Labor are cutting their nose off to spite their face in terms of the tax receipts, which are in I think last year was over $50 billion in capital gains tax receipts. They don't break it down by residential property and commercial property and other things. That's the overall receipts they're getting. But they will lose a tremendous amount of people who will not sell their properties. So that's where you might have to say, well, why don't you get a combination of property and shares that have dividends, and then you can offset those and you pay no tax on those dividends that come through. So there's potentially going to be a way in which you can still get some advantage. But this is my point. Why are you doing it, Labor? You're not going to get the tax receipts that you think you're going to get. So why make a disruption? Why play with fire? The intended and the unintended consequences are huge, and they haven't been correctly modelled, which I've been saying from day one. But coming back to the point, yes, you will be able to get some gain or some offset down the track there, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Matt says, with regards to the grandfathering that is proposed, is it the property that is grandfathered or the loan? How do they determine this? What happens if I refinance, etc.?
It is the property, Matt. So we've talked about that earlier. Well done. Book coming your way.
Tanya Aitken, I would love to understand better the reasons why Labor repealed the cancelled negative gearing in the 80s. Surely there are some lessons there that we can look to as Ben reaches to some wonderful lessons we're about to share. So I guess the question, what were the outcomes last time Labor cancelled negative gearing that caused them to reintroduce it?
Fantastic question, Tanya. In fact, such a good question, I'm going to give you both books. I love this question because you do learn from history. Now, this one's a little bit different, but what they did
We're not going to favour Tanya either. She can pick whichever one she wants.
Okay, fair enough. All right, no worries at all. All right, so what we did learn, why they reintroduced it was that Paul Keating, in August of 1987, did a cabinet submission that basically says we need to reinstall the policy. Because what he was seeing was that there was a 27% decline in construction during that period, right? So you've got a big headwind. You're seeing all of the lack of supply, the investment activity dropping away, supply going down, and rents were starting to increase. Now, we've seen, things like Macro Business and Solis like saying it didn't actually impact on rents. Devil's in the detail, Bryce. Drill down to the numbers. Houses, freestanding houses, something like 43% increase in Sydney in rental properties for those houses. So again, comes back to if you've got to always have got a big supply of units. So if those supplies keep coming, rents might be cheap in units. But if you want a bit of terra firma, you want a backyard for the kids, and you want to live in a house as opposed to living in a hotel room, then ultimately there were consequences. So we did see the lessons learnt from that was it did stifle supply. Now, Labor's counter to that is the build to rent strategy.
It's good for developers.
Plus also NRAS stage 2, right, which is some type of deduction to incentivise people to provide affordable rental accommodation. NRAS stage 1 didn't work, and if NRAS stage 2 to work, you've got to not have it complicated in these ridiculous title structures and company frameworks that were just, the resale on those properties have been appalling. The capital growth has been appalling because they're only pitched to one type of buyer until they come out of that 10-year time frame, and even then they look as complex as hell to buy. So if Labor does the right thing in terms of providing, I think it's 25,000 houses where you have this sort of reduced incentive for cheaper rent, then ultimately if it's a freestanding property and it's on a traditional Torrens title or something like that, welcome, that's a good idea. The build to rent, that's rubbish, and the numbers still won't work even though Labor's proposing to give them a 50% cap. So the big end of town gets basically a 50% tax cut, while mum and dad investors get a 50% tax hike on capital gains tax. Don't like it.
What about Labor's own Wayne Swan, Ben?
Yeah, well, Wayne Swan was on record as saying in 2010 that it would be economically disastrous to do anything on negative gearing, and he was the then Treasurer of the Federal Labor Party. So it's pretty clear that it has serious consequences. Now, they thought they did the right thing, but they just used the wrong data. So it's an embarrassment for them in terms of what is going to take shape if they implement it.
Thank you, Tanya. Good question. Last one from Mustafa. Mustafa Moose Azimi. Most experienced property investors have stated that negative gearing is not a property investment strategy, but most property investors rely on it. If negative gearing is not a property investment strategy, not saying it is or it isn't in brackets, then why is it such a hot topic of discussion ever since Labor had intentions of removing it? If one, just curious. Well, it's not a strategy, Ben, it's a tax outcome.
Yep.
And because two people could have side-by-side properties and have totally different outcomes based on the amount of tax they pay and the amount of income that they have. But I think the last 45 or so minutes probably sums up why it's a huge hot topic of discussion.
Yeah, it is, and I understand what Mustafa's trying to say here. If it's like, well, are you talking it down as a strategy? We are, and on our podcast, we've been talking down, investing in property for tax outcomes as a strategy from episode 1,
Yep.
right? It is the stupidest idea that you would sit back and say, I'm going to run a business at a loss forever on the premise of one day, hopefully it'll grow in value. That's why the asset selection is so important. But our view has been that this has been a vehicle to allow the biggest group of people in this country to provide rental accommodation, because the state governments have completely walked away from social and public housing. So mum and dad investors, mum and dad landlords provide the vast amount of accommodation for Australians. 2.7 million dwellings are provided as rental accommodation for people who are arriving through immigration, who are maybe transient or trying a new city to live in, and they need somewhere to stay. If that a stock is not available, because not everyone is going to want to buy and live in a property indefinitely. I mean, I spent some time in Queensland in my early years. I didn't want to buy where I lived. And so if those investors didn't buy that apartment or that house that I lived in for a time up there, I would have had to pay a premium, and I wouldn't have gone. So it limits mobility of human capital to move around. So the view here is that negative gearing helps with cash flow in the earlier stages of owning or starting that business. But down the track, investors pay a fortune in tax. I mean, it's significantly higher, and I'll be releasing something depending on the winner of the election in regards to just how much tax a property investor pays in a future episode.
There you go. Folks, they were wonderful questions. Thanks for sending them through. I'm sure plenty of our listeners could relate to those. So I think we gave away 21 books, Ben, which might be a record for us, which is really, really good. But hopefully that's helped you with some of the negative gearing queries that you might have had with regards to the upcoming proposed policy, and help you form a view around the upcoming election on May the 18th. So for those people that we read out, all you need to do is go to info@thepropertycouch.com.au or reach out to us on Facebook, whatever it takes. We will send you a copy of the book, and we can't wait to get that in your hands. Hey Ben, my life hack today is one of our team here, Ulrich, showed me this little trick because for those people who are part of our community, we have this simulator that allows us to reverse engineer what we talk about in our book. So someone might want to come in here and say, how do I retire on $2,000 a week? We reverse engineer that through a very complex simulator that we've built.
Yes.
Now, but the foundations of this are actually in Bill Gates's backyard in Microsoft Excel. So what I know from looking at this simulator, Ivis, is there are some amazingly complex formulas that just boggle my mind. So Ulrich showed me this little thing that whether you've got a complex formula, Ben, or you've got a little budget spreadsheet
Yes.
that has some formulas in it, if you press Control, if you're in the cell,
Yep, in the cell.
which has a formula,
Yep, so A1 as a cell. Yep, row A.
could be
column A,
C22,
C2,
whichever is your
got it.
persuasion. You're in that cell,
Yep.
and you want to know what you do is you push Control and the left square bracket.
Left square bracket. Okay, so you've got to hover into that corner.
Yep, over
Yep.
above enter.
Yep.
Ivis, I'll let it land for you.
Yep.
The left square bracket, the curvy bracket, and then you have a square bracket.
Yep.
So get the square
I'm
bracket.
with you now. Sorry, not when you're hovering the mouse over in the corner and you get that
No
little
mouse,
extra.
all
No
keyboard.
mouse. Got
all
it.
keyboard action.
Yeah.
So just for those, so we can get Ben to keep up, I'll go slow. Just the left on the keyboard square bracket. If you push Control, what it'll do is it'll take you to the cell, the first part of your formula. So people go, Bryce, how does that help me? Well, if you're in a budget, if you've built a budget spreadsheet, and you want to go where the formula is, it could be on another tab, and it could be at the top. So if you're in the cell and you just go, well, where does that actually relate to? Left cell. Now he uses that all the time. So he ran that past me, and I thought, how could I use that? And I did actually use it the other day, so it actually works.
Very good.
So for those of you who love little techie tips, there you go. Thanks, Ulrich, for that. Ben, did you know?
Did you know, Bryce? Well, I was on a plane with one of our great friends flying Jetstar, and I picked up their magazine, and I found out that it was their 15th birthday.
Wow.
So they're celebrating their
did you bring a
15th
present?
birthday, and I thought, well, given that we appear on their
They're partners of ours.
in-flight entertainment, they're partners of ours. So I thought we'll just wish them a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Jetstar.
They had their first flight in 2004, literally this month in 2004, which took off from Newcastle and flew to Melbourne.
Back in the old days, we used to edge to the front because there was no allocated seating. Remember, I just give you a little nudge, like, I want that front seat. Yeah, I remember.
Now, haven't they come a long way? And so here are some of the facts in regards to how they've celebrated their birthday. They have transported close to 300 million passengers in 15 years.
It's almost the population of the US.
And they fly
Did you know?
1 million people, Bryce, to Bali every year.
I've been one of those, Ben. I went to Bali last year on Jetstar.
There we go. In terms of the destinations that they now travel to, they've got 87 destinations in 15 countries.
Wow.
Their number of aircrafts have grown from 14 aircrafts to 136 aircrafts. Their staffing has gone from 900 to over 8,000
That's
people
incredible
around
workforce.
the country. In terms of their entertainment, which is what we're about, the most popular movie on flights
Most
in
popular,
2000
hang on. The most popular
favourite in-flight
thing is the property
movie.
couch.
Well, you've still my thunder.
Oh,
there. Still
sorry,
my thunder.
man.
So in 2018 was The Greatest Showman.
Yeah.
That was the most watched movie. But I'm sure if they had done the podcast, it would have been going hard on that. They've raised $10 million for their Star Kids community across Australia and Asia.
That's a lot of coins.
So that's very cool. And the last one I will talk about is that 2 out of 3 people who fly Jetstar had paid less than $100 for their ticket.
Wow.
So that's pretty cool.
It's compelling.
That's compelling. So congratulations. Happy birthday, Jetstar. One of our partners here as part of the Qantas Group.
Happy birthday, Jetstar.
Happy birthday.
Well done.
And there you go. Did you know in terms of Jetstar?
Well, there you go. I did not know that, Ben, so that's some terrific facts there. So, folks, just a reminder that if you've made it this far, We recommend that you go back and start at episode 1. There are some download options for you. We talked about at the beginning of the episode, and hopefully some of what we talked about today has given you some clarity and also shared in some of the frustrations of not knowing some of the detail that come from this policy. But Ben, until next week, one quick little reminder, pick a webinar tonight. Bryce, 7 o'clock now to be, you just got to sign up for your membership and you'll get an email that has the link.
7 o'clock
Australian
Nina will
Eastern
send you an
Standard
email
Time.
link where you can register to join us. And until next week,
I'll
Bryce.
be joining you, by the way.
Beautiful.
No, actually, I'll rephrase it. I'll be tuning in.
Tuning in. You won't be here.
No, I didn't get an invitation.
Oh,
No.
okay. There we go. You don't want to be on the panel?
No, you didn't invite me.
Okay. Well, there's a reason for that. Anyway, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it, Bryce.
There you go, folks. See you next week. Hey there, folks. Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listened to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now, for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarizes the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D, and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.